The sharp click of her heels echoed to the marble-floored corridor as Yoo Ji-hoon's hand clenched the edge of his mother's office door. Light from the hall spilled across his tense profile. Cheekbones set, jaw unyielding, eyes storm gray with betrayal. In that heartbeat, he realized the cruelest truth. His every step, every word, every stolen glance at freedom had been a lie orchestrated by his own blood. And standing there, his pulse thundering, was Ha Eun-seo, her eyes wide, cheeks flushed, holding a simple brown envelope that bore the weight of a secret neither had ever bargained for. Stay with me to discover why Ha Eun-seo, the quiet girl who never asked for anything, agreed to play a part in a scheme she never truly believed in. When Mrs. Yoo first slipped Eun-seo that thick envelope, the proposal sounded like fantasy. 6 months of pretending. Lunch dates in the courtyard beneath the ginkgo trees, whispered conversations in the library alcove, hand-holding strolls along the rooftop garden at dusk. In return, Eun-seo would receive enough money to cover her family's mounting debts and keep her younger brother's tuition safe. To her practical mind, it was a transaction as straightforward as any she had negotiated in her spare jobs tutoring neighbors, stocking shelves after school, or delivering homemade kimchi bundles at dawn. But reality was never so neat. 2 weeks before the term began, Ha Eun-seo tucked her shoulder-length hair behind her ears and stuffed her textbook under her arm, setting off through the narrow alleys of her neighborhood toward Hanseong High. She glanced up at the graffiti-scrawled walls. Not exactly the picture of prestige Mrs. Yoo had painted during their clandestine meeting, but she reminded herself that her goal was simple: play the part Ji-hoon's doting girlfriend for 6 months, then vanish. No complications, no feelings. On the morning they met, Ji-hoon leaned against the old stone railing of the front stairs, exuding the languid arrogance of someone born into privilege. His uniform blazer nearly perfect, his tie absent-mindedly loosened, he scrolled through his phone with the air of a teenage king who had little care for his court. He barely looked up when Eun-seo approached, but she studiously met his gaze, feigning warmth. "Hi," she said, voice steady. "I'm Ha Eun-seo. Mrs. Yoo sends her regards." His lip twitched, a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "I know who you are," he said flatly. "Let's get this over with." Their first date was a perfunctory walk to the school's back gate. Eun-seo carried 2 coffees, one sweetened with almond milk, the other black, and offered one to him. He took it without a word, sipped once, and shoved the cup into his backpack. She wore an easy smile, determined to break the ice, but his shoulders remained rigid, his bodyguard stance intact. By the time they returned to campus, she felt the sting of defeat. Over the next several days, Eun-seo repaired every crack in Ji-hoon's icy wall with small gestures. She left his favorite jasmine tea in his locker before homeroom, slipped an encouraging note into his textbook when she saw him studying late in the library, and sent him playlists of the indie songs Mrs. Yoo claimed he secretly loved. Each act carried the careful sincerity of a girl who, despite the arrangement, hoped that kindness could bridge any chasm. At lunchtime, they sat opposite ends of the same bench, sharing stories, her childhood running errands for her single mother, his solitary dinners at home, where his mother's social calendar eclipsed any chance of maternal warmth. While he spoke in clipped sentences, she answered in gentle waves of detail, revealing more of herself than she had ever dared. He watched her, unwilling to admit it, and found himself leaning in closer, just to hear the sincerity in her voice. Late one afternoon, Eun-seo lingered under the ginkgo tree, helping Ji-hoon tie the laces of his worn sneakers after a surprise charity basketball game. The sky bloomed pink and gold above them, and for a moment the world grew quiet except for their ragged breaths. He hesitated, then said, "You don't have to pretend you like basketball." She shrugged, glancing up at him. "I'll do anything to make this work." He paused, eyes softening. "Why?" Her chest tightened. She could have lied, said she enjoyed spending time with him, said his company was worth any sum. Instead, she answered truthfully, "Because it matters to you." The confession hung between them like a fragile promise. His exhaustion gave way to something vulnerable, an expression Ha Eun-seo never expected to see on the face of Yoo Ji-hoon. And in that instant, the lines of their agreement blurred, leaving only two hearts teetering on the cusp of something neither contract nor conviction could contain. As the last light faded, Ha Eun-seo swept up her books. She offered him a shy, hopeful smile, one that mirrored the first flicker of genuine warmth between them. Ji-hoon met her gaze and nodded once, as if acknowledging that perhaps this pretend relationship was no longer purely transaction. But neither of them could foresee the storm that waited just beyond the horizon, one that would test every unspoken bond they had forged, and force them to decide which mattered more, the price of a promise or the cost of the heart. A week passed, and the icy distance between Yoo Ji-hoon and Ha Eun-seo seemed unbreakable. Every morning, Ha Eun-seo slid into the seat beside him in homeroom, her heart pounding at the thought of another day spent under his frosty gaze. He barely acknowledged her presence, his gaze fixed ahead, as if she were nothing more than a shadow he'd agreed to tolerate. But Ha Eun-seo refused to be disheartened. If kindness was her weapon, then she would wield it patiently, like a craftsman coaxing beauty from marble. On the third morning, Ji-hoon's lip curled into a sneer when she offered him a perfectly wrapped rice ball. "I don't eat that," he muttered, tossing it aside. Ha Eun-seo watched it tumble to the floor, her breath catching in her throat, but she straightened her shoulders and spoke with calm conviction. "It's your favorite," she said softly. "I remembered you mentioning it once." Silence followed as the class settled in. During the first break, Ji-hoon walked ahead to the courtyard, leaving Ha Eun-seo trailing behind. She found him leaning against a stone railing, shoulders hunched, eyes distant. Without thinking, she placed a rice ball in his hand. His fingers closed around it, hesitant. Then he didn't push it away. She offered a small, hopeful smile before returning to her locker. That afternoon, Ha Eun-seo found him in the library, eyes red from staring at his phone screen. She slid onto the chair opposite him. "You look tired," she observed, reaching into her tote to pull out a thermos. "Jasmine tea. Just how you like it." Ji-hoon's hand froze mid-scroll. He glanced at her, hesitated, then took the cup with a shaky nod. He breathed in the fragrant steam as if it could soothe the rawness he refused to name. Over the next days, Ha Eun-seo's simple gestures accumulated into a quiet symphony of sincerity. She borrowed his favorite thriller novel and returned it with her handwritten review tucked inside. She slipped a small origami crane into his locker each morning, a silent token of goodwill drawn from her nimble fingers. When she saw him linger alone during lunch, she joined him without hesitation, unfolding her bento box and inviting him into conversation. At first, he responded with clipped monosyllables, "It's fine, I'm good." But gradually, the edges of his words softened under her gentle persistence. One rainy afternoon, they found themselves sharing a single umbrella as they walked to the charity fundraiser in the school gym. Ha Eun-seo noticed his shoes were soaked, the hems of his trousers darkened by the downpour. Without a word, she walked closer and draped her blazer over his shoulders. He looked down at her in surprise, her damp hair clinging to her forehead, and for a fleeting second, vulnerability flickered across his guarded expression. Then he obeyed, shrugging into her jacket, as if trusting her warmth more than his own pride. Inside the gym, hundreds of students mingled around bake sale tables and donation bins. Ha Eun-seo navigated through the crowd, her eyes bright with purpose, while Ji-hoon trailed behind, arms crossed. She approached the booth where her younger brother volunteered, and he introduced them with a shy grin. Ji-hoon offered a polite nod, and the three of them spent 10 minutes chatting. Ha Eun-seo's laughter ringing like bells as she teased her brother about his flower-covered apron. Ji-hoon found himself watching her, fascinated by the ease with which she slipped between roles. Sister, student helper, pretend girlfriend. In that moment, the performance felt less like an obligation and more like a genuine connection. Later, Ha Eun-seo coaxed Ji-hoon onto the basketball court for a charity shoot-around. He dribbled with practiced skill, but his mood remained clouded. She challenged him to a friendly free-throw contest, her competitive spark igniting under the makeshift hoops. With each shot, he offered merely a glance. With each point she scored, he allowed the smallest flash of admiration in his eyes. When her final ball arced through the net, she punched the air in triumph and glanced at Ji-hoon, expecting scorn, but instead found him clapping quietly, sincerely. His applause echoed in her chest like the cadence of hope. As the event wound down, Ha Eun-seo knelt to tie her shoelace. Rainwater had pooled at the court's edge, shimmering beneath the floodlights. She winced as the lace slipped from her fingers, and without a word, Ji-hoon knelt beside her. His fingers brushed against hers as he secured the knot, and she could feel the warmth of his hand to the damp fabric of her sock. The world around them hushed. The laughter of friends and the hum of the gym faded into a soft murmur. She dared to look up, her pulse racing. His eyes met hers, no arrogance, no contempt, just a quiet recognition that their arrangement had grown into something neither contract nor obligation could fully define. For the first time, Ji-hoon spoke beyond curt responses. "You didn't have to do any of this," he whispered, voice low, as if afraid others might hear the sincerity in his tone. Ha Eun-seo closed her eyes for a heartbeat, breathing in the electric tension, then replied, "I wanted to." Her words hovered between them, carrying the weight of every unspoken hope she had wrapped inside those paper cranes and thermos cups. He exhaled slowly, as if releasing a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, and in the space of a single heartbeat, their pretend relationship shifted. No longer a scheme orchestrated by Mrs. Yoo, but a fragile bond crafted by two unlikely allies in the midst of teenage turmoil. The evening air was thick with the scent of rain-damp pavement as Ha Eun-seo and Yoo Ji-hoon stepped out of the school gym, their bodies still humming with the adrenaline of the charity event. Strings of lantern lights flickered overhead, casting a warm glow in the courtyard where students drifted in clusters, lingering over last-minute donations and lingering conversations. Ha Eun-seo's heart fluttered like a trapped sparrow. Tonight, everything felt different. Their laughter had come easily during the bake sale, their shoulders had brushed more often than necessary, and in each glance Ji-hoon risked, she sensed something shifting, an openness in him that had once been impossible to imagine. They paused beside the old stone fountain, its water rippling in time with the quiet melody of distant acoustic guitars. Ji-hoon brushed a stray lock of hair from Ha Eun-seo's forehead and hesitated, as if unsettled by his own tenderness. Ha Eun-seo's chest tightened. She'd never asked for this kindness, yet now she ached to receive it fully. "Thank you," Ji-hoon whispered, voice low enough that only she could hear, "for everything tonight." Ha Eun-seo's lips curved in a small, genuine smile. "You didn't have to stay," she replied softly, "but I'm glad you did." Their eyes locked. In the wash of lantern light, Ha Eun-seo saw the fragile vulnerability lying beneath Ji-hoon's composed facade, an unspoken apology for the days he'd been distant, a confession of feelings he didn't yet have words to name. She stepped closer, her heart thumping so loudly she feared he would hear it. Without warning, Ji-hoon reached out, his hand trembling as it cupped her cheek. Ha Eun-seo's breath caught. The warmth of his palm set her skin alight. Slowly, almost reverently, he leaned in. The world contracted to space between their faces. The cool night air, the distant hum of music, the rustle of leaves overhead. When their lips met, it was both hesitant and desperate, like two currents colliding in a hidden river. Ha Eun-seo pressed closer, her hands resting lightly on his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heart beneath the fabric of his blazer. Time fractured every crowded corner of the courtyard. Every string of fishing line lights melted away until there was nothing but that single electric moment. Ji-hoon's arms wrapped around her, pulling her into an embrace that spoke of new beginnings and uncharted territory. Ha Eun-seo's eyes fluttered closed, and with one gentle exhale, she let herself fall. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads pressed together, breath mingling in the cool night, Ha Eun-seo whispered, but the words tangled on her tongue. Ji-hoon's eyes shone with a mixture of awe and uncertainty as he brushed his thumb across her cheek. Ha Eun-seo, he murmured, voice husky. He halted, as if afraid to break the spell. Then he rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he said again, but this time there was something more, an admission, however incomplete, that this kiss had cost him something precious, his guarded heart. Eun-seo's chest swelled with an emotion she could no longer ignore. Under the lamplight's gentle halo, she realized with startling clarity that she had fallen in love, not for 6 months, not for money, not for a favor owed. She loved him purely, fiercely, without reservation. But as the last echoes of the kiss faded, a cold knot tightened in her stomach. She remembered the envelope, the promise of payment, the clandestine transaction that had brought them together. A flash of doubt pierced her joy. Had Ji-hoon felt anything real tonight, or had he only been moved by the illusion she'd carefully constructed? Sweat beaded at her temples as she wrestled with the question. Before Eun-seo could speak, Ji-hoon straightened, his expression shifting as he searched her eyes. "What's wrong?" His voice held concern, a tenderness that made her heart both swell and ache. Eun-seo swallowed hard, her tongue thick. She knew she had to tell him the truth, about the money, about the contract that bound them. But as she opened her mouth, the word stuck, and instead she whispered, "Nothing. I'm just cold." He slipped his blazer off and draped it around her shoulders. Eun-seo shivered, not from the chill, but from the weight of the lies she still carried. They stood in silence, wrapped in the soft warmth of borrowed fabric, surrounded by the distant buzz of departing classmates. In that fragile stillness, Eun-seo realized how impossible it would be to go on without honesty. Ji-hoon had shown her his vulnerability. Now she owed him the same. She nodded, steeling herself. "Ji-hoon, there's something I need to tell you," she said quietly. His hand slid to hers, squeezing gently, urging her onward. Eun-seo took a deep breath, shutting out the world beyond his clasped fingers. "I never asked for your affection," she began, voice trembling. "And I'm not paid to fall in love." Her confession hung between them like rain-soaked petals. Ji-hoon's brow furrowed. "You're not paid?" His voice was incredulous, hope and confusion warring in his tone. Eun-seo's heart soared at his astonishment, yet she could see a flicker of relief, followed swiftly by another emotion he buried deep behind his eyes. She watched as his face paled, hurt flickering across his features. "No contract?" he repeated, voice barely above a whisper. "You did this for me?" Eun-seo swallowed, tears threatening to spill. "I did," she whispered, "because I wanted to." Ji-hoon's gaze softened, and he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss into her palm. "Then he paused, searching her face for certainty. "Then I need to know everything." Eun-seo nodded, tears slipping free. "I'll tell you," she vowed, "but promise me you'll listen." He drew her into his arms again, enfolding her in a warmth that banished the chill between them. "I promise," he murmured against her hair. As they stood beneath the lantern glow, rain-slicked stones at their feet, Eun-seo realized that whatever came next, the revelation, the reckoning, the aftermath, this moment had changed them both. She had fallen in love freely, and now the truth would have to rise from the shadows of their shared secret. Yoo Ji-hoon sat frozen on the edge of his mother's satin-upholstered chaise longue. The late afternoon light slanted to floor-to-ceiling windows like silent witnesses to his unraveling. Across from him, Mrs. Yoo straightened her pearls and permitted herself a small, self-satisfied smile. The walls of her mansion's drawing room were lined with family portraits, gilded frames capturing a legacy of refinement and social triumph. Yet in this moment, the greatest scandal was not some public misstep, but the secret she had pulled into sharp relief, the truth of the contract. "You see," Mrs. Yoo began, voice smooth as silk, "I only wanted what was best for you and for our family's reputation." She folded her hands. Ha Eun-seo was the perfect solution. 5 years a model student, impeccable attendance, no scandals. And you needed to appear engaged, a dutiful son. She raised an eyebrow. "I never intended for matters of the heart to become complicated." Ji-hoon's fingers curled into fists at his sides. He recalled the night of the charity event, the way Ha-Eun-seo's lips had pressed his, the electric spark that had chased away months of loneliness. He felt the weight of that moment collide with the iron-cold truth of his mother's confession. Complicated? He repeated, voice hollow. You call this complicated? He closed his eyes as a memory of her whisper, I fell in love, but I wasn't paid for it, echoed in his mind. Mrs. Yoo tapped her nails, her posture unruffled. She was simply performing a role, she said. Nothing more. Her eyes glinted. And now that you're aware, the arrangement is void. No more pretense. You're free to do as you wish. The words stung like acid. Ji-hoon fought the urge to stand and scream, to denounce every ounce of privilege that had placed him here. Instead, he exhaled slowly, gathering the pieces of his dignity. Is that all? He asked, voice measured. There's nothing left between us. Mrs. Yoo tilted her head. That is entirely up to you. He stood, towering over her despite himself. The room suddenly felt suffocating. The heavy drapes, the anxious portraits, his mother's composed mask. Do you understand what you've done? He demanded. You bought her silence. You bought her time. And for 6 months, you stole her chance to choose. His mother's composure flickered. You're overreacting, Ji-hoon. It was a mutually beneficial agreement. A mutually beneficial agreement? He repeated sharply. You call this beneficial? He strode toward her desk and picked up the ivory envelope stamped with her personal seal. Inside lay a final check and signed. Money intended to balance her ledger of favors. He crushed it in his fist. She loved me, he said, voice raw. Not because she was paid, because she cared. Do you even hear yourself? Mrs. Yoo drew a breath. There was never any guarantee of love, only appearances. Her eyes hardened. You aren't still angry over a simple business arrangement, are you? Ji-hoon closed his eyes, pinning thoughts back from spilling over. He envisioned Ha Eun-seo's face under the lanterns, her hesitant confession, the truth of her heart laid bare. He pictured her trembling on that courtyard stone, trusting him with her secret. He opened his eyes, gazed steely. I'm angry because you tried to manipulate both of us. Because you thought love could be calculated in one. Because you never stopped to consider how either of us would feel. Silence settled between them. Mrs. Yoo's lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, she rose. If you wish to cut ties, she said, voice brittle, be my guest. But remember where your loyalty lies. Remember who's provided you every comfort. Ji-hoon shook his head, arms spreading wide. My loyalty lies with the truth, he declared, and with a girl who taught me what love really means. He paused, voice softening. I'm done player games. With that, he turned and left the drawing room, footsteps echoing down the marble hall. Mrs. Yoo remained standing, shoulders trembling with a mixture of anger and wounded pride. Outside, the May air was cool against Ji-hoon's heated skin. He paused on the front steps, taking a trembling breath, as though inhaling courage in the world beyond his mother's walls. The town's old market sat just a few blocks away, rows of wooden stalls, sputtering neon signs, and a familiar chaos of vendors hawking rice cakes and fresh produce. It was where Ha-Eun-seo spent her Saturdays helping her mother sell homemade kimchi and hand-stitched pouches. He had to find her. Now, he strode down the cobblestone lane, mapping his path by memory. The flower stall with dried chrysanthemums, the pharmacy with green tile facade, the small shrine tucked between a noodle shop and a laundromat. His heart pounded so loudly he feared he'd miss her if she slipped away in the throng. Meanwhile, Ha Eun-seo sat on a low stool behind her family stall, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow as she ladled steaming kimchi into paper bowls. She hummed a quiet tune under her breath, an old folk melody of longing and resilience. Her mother was in the back, rolling rice cakes for the next customer. For a moment, Ha-Eun-seo allowed herself to savor the simple rhythm of the market. Children tugging on parents' sleeves, a chorus of bartering voices, the scent of grilled fish on the breeze. Then Ji-hoon appeared at the corner of her stall, his uniform blazer slung over his shoulder, his tie undone and fluttering in the breeze. Ha Eun-seo froze, her ladle poised midair. The world around her seemed to hush, as though the market itself held its breath. He stepped forward, boots clicking against the wooden slats of the walkway. Without pausing, Ji-hoon crossed the small space between them and knelt at her side, glancing up at the piled jars of kimchi. Ha Eun-seo's cheeks burned as she realized every person in the market had stopped to watch. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crushed envelope, the check peeking through torn paper. He held it out for her to see. "I don't want this," he said quietly, "and I don't want to be worth anything measured by your mother's ledger." Ha Eun-seo's heart fluttered at the sight of him kneeling, humble, earnest, vulnerable. She set aside the ladle and met his gaze. "June, you don't have to." He shook his head. "I do." He stood, bending to brush a strand of hair from her face. "I came here because I'm breaking ties with my mother, and because I need you to know the truth. If you love me for free, I promise to be worth twice as much." Her breath caught, tears blooming in her eyes. Around them, the market resumed its rhythm, the bartering voices, the sizzle of street food. But for Ha Eun-seo, every other sound faded into silence. She felt the weight of his words settle between them like falling petals, fragile and sacred. She reached up, hands trembling, and placed them on his chest. "You already are," she whispered. Ji-hoon's lips curved into a soft smile. Then, without hesitation, he closed the distance and kissed her, tentative at first, then with a depth of emotion that spoke of newly forged promises and a love unbound by contracts. A veil of golden afternoon light filtered through the narrow streets of the market as Yoo Ji-hoon retraced his steps toward Ha Eun-seo's stall. His mother's mansion, with its polished marble floors and hushed corridors, felt further away with every breath he drew. Each step carried the weight of his decision, walking away from wealth and expectation towards something infinitely more precious. He rounded the corner where the kimchi jars glimmered like amber in the sun. Ha-Eun-seo stood behind her family's wooden table, carefully arranging paper bowls of steaming kimchi. Her hair was pinned back in a loose braid, her uniform skirt dusted with a faint fleck of chili powder. When she saw him approaching, her hand still mid-motion and her soft humming faltered. Ji-hoon paused a few feet away, gathering courage. The market's usual clamor, the hawking of vendors, the laughter of children, seemed to hush around them. He lifted his gaze, meeting Lucille's wide, startled eyes. "I promised you I'd come," he said, voice steady but charged with emotion. He reached into his blazer pocket and drew out the crumpled check, Mrs. Yu's final attempt to buy their story. He crushed it between his fingers, letting the paper shred to bits on the cobblestones at their feet. Ha-Eun-seo's breath caught. She took a half step forward, as if to intercept the fragments, but Ji-hoon held her gaze. "I cut all ties with my mother today," he continued. "Her money, her image, none of it matters without you. I walked away from everything she built because I want a life I build with you." A soft breeze carried the scent of chili and jasmine through the air. Ha-Eun-seo's heart pounded as she listened, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes. She could see the resolve etched into every line of Ji-hoon's face, the stubborn set of his jaw, the fierce fire in his eyes, the gentle tremor of hope. "You don't have to worry about being paid to love me," he said, voice low but certain. "If you love me for free, I promise to be worth twice as much." Her lips curved into a radiant smile that caught the sunlight, and she wiped a single tear from her cheek. "You're already worth more than I ever dreamed," she whispered. "And I'll love you with every ounce of my heart, no payment needed." Ji-hoon closed the distance between them, draping his blazer over her shoulders once more, this time as an act of affection, not obligation. His hand found hers among the rows of kimchi jars. With a gentleness that spoke of reverence, he brushed his thumb along her knuckles. Then, beneath the canopy of tattered awnings and fluttering price tags, they leaned in. Their lips met in a tender, lingering kiss, soft at first, then growing in passion as the world around them burst into color. The vendors and shoppers paused to watch the young couple, but all noise faded into the background. In that moment, there were only Ji-hoon and Eun-seo, two hearts liberated from every expectation but their own. When they finally parted, Ji-hoon rested his forehead against hers, his breath mingling with hers in the humid afternoon air. "Our story is ours alone," he murmured. "No signatures, no contracts, just us." Eun-seo nodded, her chest fluttering with joy. "Just us," she echoed. They stood there for a long moment, hand in hand, smiles bright enough to outshine the neon signs overhead. Then Ji-hoon swept Eun-seo into a gentle spin, laughter bubbling between them like a shared secret. Vendors resumed calling out their wares. The market's rhythm returned, but Ji-hoon and Eun-seo moved through it as if walking on air. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the cobblestones, Ji-hoon led Eun-seo away from the stalls. They climbed the narrow staircase of the old library building, emerging onto the rooftop garden, their own private refuge. Beneath the flutter of wind-blown ribbons tied to the railing, they paused. Ji-hoon gathered Eun-seo in his arms. "No matter what comes next," he said, voice unwavering, "I promise to make every day with you feel like the first day I truly lived." Eun-seo pressed her cheek to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "And I promise to stand by you in every storm and sunshine," she replied. They shared one final kiss as the city lights blinked awake below them, two souls intertwined, ready to face the world together, bound not by contract or obligations, but by a love forged in truth and choice.